Welcome to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the PulpNet, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines, for over 20 years, online at thepulp.net. In this Pulp Event podcast, Matt Mooring, publisher at Altus Press, discusses Hard-Boiled Dicks, a look at Dime Detective magazine. The talk was recorded on July 28, 2017, at PulpFest 2017 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And I want to thank Jim Traylor, Brooks Hefner, and John Locke for helping out with material for this. So 22 years, 274 issues. As a quick background, two pulp veterans, Harry Steger, formerly of Dell Publications, and Harold Goldsmith of Ace Publications, pooled $10,000 to start their own pulp line, Popular Publications. In 1930, they had 4 magazines, which were Battle Aces, Detective Action Stories, Gang World, and Western Rangers. Unfortunately, these were 20-cent cover prices, and sales were pretty flat. So Dime Detective started in November 1931, and Steger wanted a similar detective magazine to Black Mask, which would have the same high-quality writers, but at half the price, hence the name Dime Detective. On launch, author and journalist described this new pulp as Dime Detective magazine will go for straight-line detective stories, preferably novelettes between 10 and 15,000 words in length, though it'll also have short stories of around 5,000 words. The stories must contain an adequate amount of action and mystery, although the action element need not be so heavily stressed as in our detective action stories. We will not accept out-and-out deductive stories, preferring the clues to be worked out through the process of action rather than through the process of deduction. Also, we don't care for the old-time detective story, which begins with the murder already committed and lists categorically the clues from A to Z. Rather, we prefer to have the murder mysteriously committed before the eyes of the reader. So this is a interesting chart about Black Mask, which was obviously the main competitor for Dime Detective. This may be blasphemy, but I'm going to argue that the point that when comparing the entire runs of Black Mask and Dime Detective, that Dime Detective was the better magazine. Obviously, Dime Detective never had Hammett writing for them, but the level of quality and variety of material was consistently better in Dime Detective. So a few facts that we have to consider about Black Mask. Black Mask was actually canceled or nearly canceled 3 times that I know of before Popular acquired it in 1940. The first time was around 1922-24, and again in 1926 before Joseph Shaw became its editor. And in 1940 it was canceled, but Popular kept it going, and they just missed a month once they purchased it. Also, Dime Detective outlived Black Mask by over 2 years in the 1950s at the end of each title's run. Although Black Mask had been spared of cancellation by Shaw, his editorial direction had already begun to diminish Black Mask's circulation by the time Dime Detective was conceived. Shaw's formula for editorial success was a bit stagnant at that point. So this is an interesting chart here. This is from the Audit Bureau circulations for Black Mask. And I don't know if I can shoot this thing too close to it. Oh, there we go. You're going to have to imagine. So its peak right here, this is December 1929. And does anyone know what was going on in Black Mask at that time? Yeah. So you can see why things would be looking pretty good there.
What was going on?
Maltese Falcon was in there. Yeah. Around July 32, where is that? Am I pretty good right here?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. That's probably when Dime Detective sales were starting to affect it. I should say that right around here, that's 125,000 copies sold.
How many?
125,000 copies sold. So after that July 32 area, that's about 52,000 copies sold. That's
Monthly, right?
What's that?
Monthly.
Monthly, yes. In 36, around here, this is when Joseph Shaw was fired, and that was, they'd gone up a bit to 56,000 copies sold. So it's a big drop off there. And part of the problem was for them was that Dime Detective was published twice a month from mid 33 to mid 35. In an attempt to compete, Black Mask lowered their price to 15 cents, but the slide was inevitable. Getting 2 issues of Dime Detective per month for the same price of the single issue was too much for them to overcome. And as you can see, around that mid-1935 point, that sales were at a pretty low point. So anyway, when Popular bought it in 1940, they placed it under their Fictioneers imprint, and Writer's Digest announced that the, quote, the price will be cut from 20 to 15 cents. It is to be on a regular monthly basis, paying the same good rates as Dime Detective does. It's edited by the same man, Kenneth White, and manuscripts submitted to either magazine will automatically be considered for both. And this wasn't entirely accurate. While the material was considered for both magazines, the word rate for Fictioneers titles paid significantly less than those published for the main Popular Publications imprint. So it wasn't in the best financial interests of the authors to see print in Black Mask. And although it was clearly an acquisition of a well-regarded pulp, just like Adventure a few years earlier, Harry Steger regarded Black Mask as the headlining detective title for his secondary cut-rate line of pulps. So let's look at the editorial team. A big part of the success is obviously these guys. So around 1923 was when the Black Mask style was starting to form, but at this point, this was 10 years into that, and it was time for a bit of a change. Harry Steger, who was as I said, the original publisher, he also acted a bit as an editor on this at the time. He and editorial manager Roger Terrell initially edited Dime Detective, and their hard-boiled style had an ingrown sense of obligation, according to Frederick C. Davis. Obviously, they pushed to action as well. But longtime editor Ken White took over in '36 and steered the successful editorial approach, achieving a high level of quality. And later in life of the magazine, Alden Norton was probably the editor. So that's shots of all of them there. So the initial editorial focus, Dime Detective had 2 stipulations, those being that they would not include serials, and the series characters either conceived completely by or polished up by Harry Steger and or Dime Detective's editor at the time would be exclusive to Dime Detective. They also allowed humor and horror and spun the hard-boiled style to include more quirky, offbeat characters, bending a far cry from the more formulaic detectives of the Shaw era of Black Mask. The result was a more varied magazine. Roger Terrell was a firm believer in running stories featuring what he called emotional urgency, which was expected to grab readers by the throat and not let go until the last page of the story. So the first issue of Black Mask showcased 3 different styles of stories. Obviously, the Black Mask school of tough private eyes, like Earl Stanley Gardner's Snowy Shane, which was similar to Ed Jenkins, and Frederick Neville's Jack Cardigan was similar to his character in Black Mask, Donahue. The other side was the Detective Fiction Weekly school of more traditional detectives. And I should mention that, though I mentioned Black Mask quite a bit, it should be noted that Detective Fiction Weekly was just hitting its stride at this time, so it should be looked at as just as much a competitor. Steger once mentioned that I wasn't aiming at any other book in particular when I started Dime Detective. I just wanted to get good detective stories, that's all. I picked out the best authors I could find and went after those I liked. And one of the authors here, as you can see, is T.T. Flynn, who is best known for his Detective Fiction Weekly in terms of the story. Another one was Edward Parrish Ware, also a Detective Fiction Weekly favorite. He wrote a lot of Ozarks-related detective stories. And the third style was the horror mystery school of melodramatic horror. And these are stories with a touch of horror. And one example of that is the J. Allen Dunn story here, as you can see on the cover there. And they ran horror mystery stories in every issue until Popular spun them off in their own sister publication called Dime Mystery in October 1933, although they still kept the weird cover look up until 1935 of that horror mystery. And this may seem a bit of an odd mix, but you have to remember that Black Mask also carried westerns from Variety. I'm not sure if this is true, but I've heard that reported that Dime Detective really launched to 300,000 copies sold an issue in quick order. Dime Detective obviously primarily ran novelettes. An average of 4 or 5 stories filled up a typical issue. Black Mask usually had 6 or 8. Dime Detective also paid 4 cents a word, which is 25% more than Black Mask, and the prospect of penning longer stories at a significantly better rate was tempting enough for many of Black Mask's main authors to make the jump. So some of them included Earl Stanley Garner, who you just heard a lot about, Neville, Carol John Daly, Roger Torrey, John K. Butler, and later in another wave, Frederick C. Davis, Norbert Davis, and Raven Chandler as well. In mid-1936, Ken White instructed his writers to say, quote, "Your hero can be a private detective or a lawman of any kind, but he must be colorful and everything he does must be convincing. The editor will buy no story about which he thinks even one reader will write in and say that it contains an inaccuracy. Clever crook pattern stories are used in short lengths, no gangster stories." White edited Dime Detective until 1948 and can be credited for the long-term high quality found in Dime Detective, I think. So we'll look at a couple of authors here. Sorry for the crappy photo, but that's from his Frederick Neville's feature. Sometimes they featured authors in the pages of Dime Detective. Obviously, he's one of the main Black Mask writers that came over. Some of his series characters include, as I mentioned, Cardigan. He was the longest running character that was in Dime Detective for 44 stories. He also had a stray Sergeant Brinkhouse story, which was a series character they had in Detective Action Stories, and I'm assuming it's probably an inventory story that had been moved over once Detective Action Stories had been canceled. You heard a little bit about this fella here just now. He appeared 27 times in Dime Detective. And that story that he had in that first issue, featured a character named Snowy Shane, who was very similar to Ed Jenkins. Some of the characters he had were Paul Pry, who appeared 5 times, which we heard a bit about earlier. He had a character named Dane Scarl, who was a master of magic. Dick Bentley, who was a freelance bodyguard, and Go-Get-'em Garver, sorry. He also had a series it's called Small Weston and Burke, which were occult detectives told in the first person. Kind of an interesting series. Carol John Daly was another writer from Black Mask who made a move over. His first character was V. Brown, who appeared in 18 stories, who was a songwriter who solved crimes. Kind of an interesting series that also appeared in hardcover, because some of the stories, even though they weren't serials, they were kind of connected. He also had another series called about a character named Clay Holt, who was a private investigator, and Marty Day, who teamed up with a mysterious character who was a millionaire who lost all of his money and teamed up there's a lot of those, and teamed up with this mysterious fellow named the Reckoner, who he kind of worked as his leg man. And this is kind of interesting, since this is a series that started in the Black Mask knockoff pulp called Black Aces, and it moved over to Dime Detective. He really wrapped up a lot of these other characters once his main character, Race Williams, made the move over to do Dime Detective from Black Mask. And obviously Steger knew the value of the character and focused on Race Williams. He had him appear 21 times in Dime Detective. Also, interestingly, coincided with at the time with a lot of the horror mystery stories were making the move out of Dime Detective. So, again, you have to put a little faith in the selling power of Daily at this time. It's interesting that at this point, Daily concentrated mainly on Dime Detective and Detective Fiction Weekly. P.T. Flynn was another prolific writer for Dime Detective. He appeared 80 times in the magazine. Probably his most popular character was Joe Maddox, who was a bookie, usually solving crimes at racetracks. He had a character named Val Easton, who was a intelligence agent who fought creepy Chinese villains with poisonous snakes. And Izzy O'Shea was another series that ran for a few installments. Frederick C. Davis, he was another prolific author. He appeared 71 times. His main character was Okie Oakley, who was a Beverly Hills private investigator who he specialized in weird cult stories, kind of similar to Dime Mystery, and they all took place in the film industry. He also had Bill Brent for 15 stories, who spent most of his time in disguise as Lorna Lorne, a lovelorn newspaper columnist. He had another character, Carter Cole, who appeared 7 times, who was a psychiatrist, had twin nurses as his aides. And a Keyhole Carey, who appeared about 8 times. He had a show over the airways where he would investigate and solve crimes for the show. Those were pretty early characters. He had another one in a later phase called Thackeray Hackett, who appeared 9 times. John Lawrence was another longtime writer for Dime Detective. The Marquis of Broadway was probably his most popular character, appeared 24 times from the 30s to the 50s, and he's actually one of the few authors that appeared in Dime Detective in all 3 decades. Later in life, he started a series in Black Mask around the Broadway Squad, which is Marquis of Broadway's crew, so it's kind of an interesting crossover. He had another character named Sam Beckett, who appeared a number of times, who was another interesting character. Cass Blue was yet another PI of his. He had Drago of HQ, which was a bit of an honest version of the Marquis of Broadway. D.L. Champion, I wish I had a shot of him. I've never found a photo of this guy, so you're stuck with a cover there. D.L. Champion wrote 47 times for Dime Detective. His main character was Inspector Alhoff, who was one of the defective detectives. He's a cop who lost his legs during a police raid. And this injury drove him to insanity, but he was such a good cop that they kept him on the force. They just shoved him in an office across the street. He also had another character, Mariano Mercado, who appeared 9 times, who was a hypochondriac private investigator in Mexico City. John D. McDonald, he was one of the main authors in the latter portion of Dime Detective, although he had no series characters. Cornell Woolrich, he appeared 31 times, pretty prolific. No series characters, though, and we like series characters. Obie Myers was another prolific writer, mainly for the aviation pulps for Popular, but he appeared 30 times in this title. Jan Dana was in 26 times. He had a character named the Acme Insurance Op, and guess what? He's a insurance agent. Oscar Schiskell, he appeared 26 times in Dime Detective. His main character was Dr. Wellington Dime, who was a New York medical examiner in private practice. And his cases usually are revolved around the crimes of a masked man named the Wolf. Pretty exciting stuff. William E. Barrett, he appeared 25 times in Dime Detective. He specialized in characters with double identities, such as the Blue Barrel. He appeared 9 times. He was a newspaper columnist whose alter ego worked at the Twin Moons Casino and ran the roulette wheels and got most of his info from there. He had another series about Needle Mike, who was a bored millionaire playboy who went undercover running a tattoo parlor by the docks. And most of his cases revolved around the parlor's clients. Yeah. But of course he had to get in disguise working there, so he had a fake gold tooth that he put in. John K. Butler, he wrote 24 stories for Dime Detective. Tricky Enright appeared 6 times, who was supposedly an escaped convict and a petty thief, but he was actually working undercover in the criminal underworld. Rex Lonergan, who was based in San Francisco, another character was in Disguises. You had Steve Midnight, who was a LA taxi driver for the Red Owl Company, another former millionaire. So what are you doing? You're a former millionaire, you drive cabs at midnight. He was actually profiled twice. I mentioned that Dime Detective profiled authors. He was actually profiled twice. Peter Page, he had a character named Cash Whale who appeared 17 times in the magazine. Richard Dermody had appeared 21 times, all of them around a character named Doc Pierce, who was a con man who traveled around the East Coast scamming locals and bamboozling his victims. And usually he had them sign some sort of waiver, so he was never legally on the hook. Obviously, most of these victims were deserving of his scams. Hubie Cave had a couple of series characters. He wrote 20 stories for Dime Detective. He had 9 stories of Peter Kane, who was an alcoholic who was booted from the police force. He was based in Boston. He had another character named Officer Coffee. G.T. Fleming Roberts, he wrote 12 stories. Main one was Jeffrey Wren, who appeared 9 times, who was a magician detective. A lot of G.T. Fleming Roberts were in that ilk. Who was a former vaudevillian magician, and he operated out of a magic shop in Indianapolis. J. Paul Suter, who wrote 10 stories, but all of them were of a character named Horatio Humberton, who was a mortician, undertaker, detective. But his main hobby was catching the criminals, and he's aided by his hearse driver on his cases. Raymond Chanley, you might have heard of this guy. He wrote 7 stories for Dime Detective. 5 of them were about a character named John Dalmas, the stories were reworked into Philip Marlowe stories later. Norbert Davis, he specialized in humorous, hard-boiled stories. He wrote 19 stories for the magazine, 5 of them about Max Latin, who was a character who owns a restaurant, and he operates his private investigation business from the back booth of it. Most people think he's a con man or a crook. And he also had a slightly longer series about Bail Bond Dodd, who was a bail bondsman, as you might expect. He's usually chasing down crooks to recoup his bond. So there's some great titles there for some of the stories. Nice stuff. This is a bit of a cover oddity here. This is the only cover of March 15, 1934, where they featured a red version of the logo. Yellow would look so much better. Primary cover artists, William Rustwig was the main one. He did the first 37 covers, and then John Newton Howard took over, did 20. Walter Baumhofer took over the duties. He did 21 consecutive covers. Tom Lovell mixed in a little bit there, and then Baumhofer came back and did a handful more. Later artists were Malvin Singer as well, and after a while the cover credits disappeared, but they came back, and Raphael DeSoto started picking up a lot of credits in the magazine. Norman Saunders, you might have heard of him. He did a lot of covers. Robert Stanley, Samuel Cherry, and Albert Drake. We'll talk a little bit about the interior artists in a couple of slides. So you can see some of the prices there. Didn't stay a dime very long, really. So we got some exciting documents to show here. So by the 40s, the objective hard-boiled style of writing had completely given way to a more subjective approach, in which real people, unlikely participants, became protagonists, and characterization replaced the old pulp action for action's sake formula, showing a bit of the Hollywood tinge to some of these stories. And I think a lot of the Woolrich and John B. McDonald are good examples of this. The mid-40s saw a lot of turnover of authors. Many of the popular authors of the first 10 years had been moved on. The wartime paper shortages also affected this. So there were 274 issues of Dime Detective. In all, there were 298 writers who wrote for it, producing just over 1,500 stories. So, let's look at some of the popular records here. So they keep pretty good track of a lot of their stories here. Had a card catalog. These are pretty interesting. And you can see that in many cases they bought the stories and then changed them upon publication, the titles upon publication. So we're kind of interesting there. So here's some Frederick Davis ones. Some more exciting stuff there. Can't see who that is, but I'm sure it's awesome.
UK.
There you go. Yeah, it is awesome. Okay. Who's that?
Max Brandon.
Oh, yeah. Max Brand. Yeah. He had a series character named Dan Clovely. He used that name often. I think there were 3 stories in that series. Here's some more here, which they often moved stories around to other publications than the magazines they were originally published for. You can see that that poor soul, I can't see who that is, that second one there bounced around from a number of magazines until it finally saw print. And they were actually pretty good about keeping records of the artists too. You can see Howitt down there about the covers that he did, what they paid for them. So some of the interior artists, who is that? Yeah, that's the interior artists. Samuel Cahan, Joseph Farron, and John Fleming Gould were amongst the most prolific of the early artists for Dime Detective. Ernest Chiriaca did some stuff. Those other 2 checks, if any Golden Age comic book fans are around, they might recognize those. Ed Ash, I think he did that Daredevil versus Hitler issue of whatever that was. I think he did some stuff for Timely as well. And is that Carl Pfeiffer? Is that right? All right. I know him from drawing the Submariner in the 40s. There's some checks for cover artists. There's our guest of honor here. I wish you'd seen this. Oh well. There's a check for one of her covers there. I should also mention back here, I left it off, another comic book connection was the Eisner Shop did work for the magazine as well. And some of the more popular authors writing for it, Cornell Woolrich, Daly, that John Lawrence, that's for his chapter. And the fifth anniversary issue, they did a round robin story. And I think 5 authors did 1 chapter each, and then they passed it along, and that's this check for his installment. A couple more prolific writers for Dime Detective. Here's a couple of Raymond Chandler checks for Dime Detective. That one at the top there, is that the one that's made out to Joe Shaw, who was his editor agent at the time? So that's kind of cool. One thing that's kind of interesting here is the companion magazine. So 1949, Popular was looking to add some additional titles to their line. And they had a couple of author-specific titles. I think like A. Merritt's Fantasy was one, Max Brand Western. So they contacted Dashiell Hammett here. I don't know if you can read it. I'll read it real quick. They said, you know what, that'd be kind of cool to have a Dashiell Hammett magazine. So they said, we were thinking about putting out 2 or 3 magazines in which outstanding writers' names are incorporated into the titles. Since one of our magazines under consideration is in the detective field, your name quite naturally comes to mind. In brief, the setup we have in mind would be as follows. a magazine well designed and printed and slanted directly at the discriminating detective story reader, bearing some such title as Dashiell Hamm's Detective Story Magazine. We have a Western book lined up on a basis whereby we have agreed to pay $100 per issue to the writer whose name appears on the title with a guarantee of at least $1,200. That is, if the magazine should be taken off the active list before 12 issues, we would send a check for the difference between the amount paid and $1,200. I can assure you that the general setup of the magazine would be entirely in keeping with the prestige with your name would lend to the title, and we are extremely interested in getting your reaction to the general idea. Will you drop us a line to let us know your convenience? So this is made out to Dashiell Hamm, and I wish I knew what the answer was. Well, the magazine never appeared, so I guess we know. They must have known what his answer was going to be, because on the same day, they sent the same letter to Raymond Chandler. Exactly the same. So actually, he wrote back twice about it. He says, many thanks for your letter of April 29th, which had to be forwarded. We've lived in La Jolla since 1946. Yours is the sort of proposition that a man only gets when he can afford to kick it out of the window. For a number of reasons I won't bore you with, but I don't think it appeals to me. But Brandt and Brandt are my agents, and if you feel inclined to discuss the idea with Carl Brandt, I'm sure you know where you can reach him. If you see Harry Steger around, please give him my kind regards. Earl Gardner brought Mr. and Mrs. Steger to me some time ago, and they talked so damn much no one else could get a word in, which is a pity because my wife and I both would have liked to talk to the Stegers. So they wrote back. Alden Norton, who I said at this time was the editor of Dime Detective. Of course, I see your angle. We're just not in the position to afford to pay you the price which your present rank in the crime writing field entitles you to. I spoke with Carl Brandt over the phone the other day, and he's not very keen with the idea either, so I guess we'll have to call it quits. It still seems like a good deal, however, and you can't blame a guy for trying. By a good deal, I mean that the book we have envisioned will be entirely dignified in approach and of a good nature, which would serve to keep your name continually in front of the public, which isn't a bad idea. It was my thought, although I had not said so in my last letter, that this sort of thing is worth a lot to any writer, and that this is in part helps you with to take up the financial slack and thus help us both. However, you and Carl are the best judge of that. In any case, thanks a lot for your prompt reply. Incidentally, I show your letter to Mr. Steger and he wishes to be remembered to you. And again, Raymond Chandler wrote back to that, and he says, thanks for your letter. I don't know what you and Carl Brandt said to each other, but evidently I did not make myself clear at all. It is not a question of money at all. If you had offered me 5 times as much, you would have made it just that much harder for me to say no, but I hope I would have said it. I belong to that eccentric minority which holds that a writer cannot peddle his name or reputation without putting something into the pot. You can sell a right to any part, or any part of a right in something you have created by your work. You can sell your services. You cannot take money for nothing. If I had any connection with the magazine, it would have been another matter. I'm not criticizing you for who think differently. I just don't agree with them, either as a matter of ethics or of policy. And I believe and hope that my policy is correct, even though it does not always pay off. It's sometimes very difficult to draw the line, but one has to draw the line just the same. I think you know very well what I mean. So it's kind of a cool letter here to kind of envision what a companion magazine to Dime Detective would look like. I haven't done the math to figure out what they came out with. Maybe it was an FBI detective. Not sure, but so there.
Colbert magazine and Max Brand magazine.
I mean, what would have been the detective variation of that? I'm not sure what that. Maybe it was FBI detective or something. New detective. I'm not sure. So I think that's it. That's it. Yeah, it won't advance any further. So that must be it. Does anyone have any questions? I don't have any answers though. Yes.
I think I've read that Raymond Chandler, CBS had a radio show, and for the rights of that, he was getting $1,000 per episode. So, like, who needs $1,000 12 times a year when you're getting $40,000 a year? Just have your name on the radio show.
Yeah, but it's $100. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
You've been listening to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the Pulp Net, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines, for over 20 years. Please visit us online at thepulp.net. Thank you for listening, and keep reading the pulps. The Pulp Event podcast is copyright 2017.